Hi everyone, we'll get started with the next session. So the next session is a SIG update and there are multiple speakers for this session. I'd just like to remind everyone to fill out the session survey at the end of the session and please ensure your devices are put onto silent. For the first session, for the first SIG update, we have the CVSS SIG. CVSS, yep.
Thank you, everyone. So I assume you see what I see. So sort of a big deal this time around for us. We've been working for half a decade on the next generation of CVSS, so we are very proud to announce the public preview of CVSS version 4.0. We'll hope this button does it. So this is similar to last year's update. We have several major improvements to CVSS, finer granularity of some of the metrics. Attack complexity was sort of an overloaded metric, so now we have attack requirements as well as attack complexity. We have also had a lot of feedback about scope. There are multiple constituents within the same area that have different opinions on how scope was scored. We also consider that to be a lossy compression of information from provider to consumer. So now we've uncompressed that. Scope is no longer a metric. We now have independent metrics for CIA of the vulnerable system as well as the subsequent system. Simplification of the threat metrics, previously known as the temporal metrics. There were a lot of temporal metrics that were really unloved. They weren't used that often. So the crux of temporal was threat, and the threat was through exploit maturity. So using a third-party threat intel system or an open one, such as EPSS, you can now have a single metric that would allow a modification of the full CVSS score as base, threat, and environmental. And one that I really am fond of is the supplemental metrics. There are a lot of, so the base metrics have the intrinsic characteristics, the technical severity of the vulnerability. However, there's a lot of stuff that I know that I'd like you to know that don't really affect the technical severity, but may affect patch priority or may affect some mitigation effort. So we have things such as automatable, whether it's wormable, recovery. Is it an automatic recovery or does it require manual intervention, or you smell smoke and have to return it to the factory? Things like value density and the provider urgency are helpful. One of them aligns with SSVC quite well, but the other one, you've probably seen vulnerability reports from vendors that provide a color code or something that gives you a little more information about, well, this is a 9.8, but you can probably patch it tomorrow, or this is a 5.0, but you probably should patch it right away. So this gives you more of a color, no pun, of the urgency from the vendor's perspective, the provider's perspective, I'm sorry. And then, as you know, we live in an OT, ICS, IoT world, so we have specific attributes, metrics within the new standard that handle safety and OT. One of the other things that we're really stressing, and we stress every year, is that CVSS base score is not a risk measurement. There are technical severity attributes, but then there's also threat and environmental. Consider it of three legs of a stool. So when you consider what I know about the vulnerability, I'm an evil vendor, by the way, if what I know about the vulnerability is the technical severity, what you know about the threat landscape is it's being actively exploited, and it's on your critical infrastructure. Well, now that's three legs of a stool that could give you what you could consider to be risk, but base score alone is not risk. We'll get into more of that in the user guide as well, because that's been revamped, as well as the spec. And then this is sort of, I believe it's my last one. You've heard a lot about EPSS, and you've probably heard about SSVC, which just happens to be CVSS spelled backwards. All three of these are not competing, they're complementary. Think of a toolbox with 3 different tools in it. So CVSS gives you the technical severity, EPSS gives you the threat landscape at this moment in time or predicted over the next 30 days. SSVC gives you an ability to make a decision on patch priority. So all of these work together, they're very complementary, and the user guide has references to all of them as well. And we also have some best practices. I won't read the slide because everybody hates when slides are read, but the idea is, again, the best practice is to use the base score as a starting point, temper it with the threat metrics, and then consider your asset value. Because once you do the asset management and understand that this is a cafeteria menu versus the critical infrastructure of your country, then you can better provide a modified score. So not all 7.5s need patching by close of business Friday, for example. The timeline is the most that we're excited about. So June 8th, this Thursday, will be the official public preview of CVSS v4. We've been working with first social media, and we had a teaser sent out on Monday morning. If you do have a Twitter account still and haven't moved to Mastodon, then please feel free to find and retweet that. We'll have a little bit more information probably today or tomorrow, and then we'll have the official public preview of CVSS on Thursday. All public comments should be sent to cvss@first.org. I think that's it. That's links to docs, but you can't click the screen, so they're fairly straightforward. Everything with the typical URL with a v4-0 on it is where you'd find our goodies. And that's it for me. Thank you.
The next SIG update is for DNS abuse.
Hi, everyone. I have been considering that we should probably call it the DNS anti-abuse SIG because I am not trying to make more DNS abuse happen, but that ship has sailed. So we try to organize some of the incident response community stuff around DNS abuse and anti-abuse. We've been working together for about 3 years now. Earlier this year, we had got our paper out, sort of summarizing the work we've done over the last 3 years. And so just going to basically point out to you that if you ever interact with DNS during the course of any of your incidents, or if you consume DNS abuse reports, or you need to help your constituents file or direct or whatever DNS abuse reports, we're going to try to help you with that. And if you have other use cases that we're not meeting, please come to the SIG meetings. So, like I said, we've been, I guess, 4 years now. So America and some other folks joined that, formed that up. I have been helping herd the cats for about a year now. There we go. Obviously, you don't have to memorize this. If you search for the DNS abuse SIG, you'll find on the first website, you'll find the document, but put a thing out. I'll give you a little bit of an update on what's in it so you can decide whether you want to go download it. Basically, the existing DNS abuse folks would just sort of talk about phishing, malware, whatever. And that's not really how incident response folks need to understand what they need to do about it. It's not actually the technique by which the malware is delivered via DNS abuse. There's cache poisoning, DDoS against the DNS, all kinds of different takeovers of different kinds of resolvers, like poisoning the registry versus poisoning the registrar or whatever. And then we have all these different stakeholders within DNS. Talking this morning about how everyone thinks that at the first level, DNS is like, oh, we just need to map a name to an IP address and then everything is fine, very simple, right? But of course, there's registrars, registries, end users, the stub resolvers, the local recursive resolver, the larger recursive resolver you're talking about, like Google DNS or whatever. then you have all the different hosting providers, blah, 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 and then the different people that can help respond. And so because there's so many different stakeholders and different kinds of abuse, it's complicated to map just who you talk to. We've talked about trying to decide how to tell people what to do in response to, oh, so I saw cache poisoning and I want to help mitigate it, and so I should tell the registrar this. But just who you talk to is hard enough to get sorted out. So for each of the 3 phases in incident response, for each of the different kinds of abuse, if you see that and you're trying to do the thing, then you should talk to this person, registrar, end user, whatever. So it looks like this, bunch of yes, no's with caveats. I'm very open to people having suggestions on how to make this more readable. We talked about that a lot, and this is what we ended up with. It's complicated to communicate a 3-dimensional matrix on a PDF. But that's what it is. And if you are, helping triage incident abuse or DNS abuse, very happy to have you come to the SIG and tell us what's not meeting your needs, what is meeting your needs, what we can do better. We don't know exactly what we're going to do next. There's been some discussion about either helping people diagnose which kind of DNS abuse they are seeing, so we're not treating that as like an oracle that someone already just knows, but then that's going to have to be updated a lot. We do have the whole taxonomy formalized into JSON as a MISP galaxy. So if you are doing incident reports through MISP and you want to share specifically what kind of DNS abuse you diagnosed something to be, you can provide that information. Which, I think if we got a lot of information about what exactly folks were seeing where, we could then start talking about what different kinds of abuse are most prevalent, direct policy resources, like that sort of a thing. But of course, there's a chicken and egg thing here. We need to define what we mean before we can collect data about it. But so now we have that done. Be very happy to have folks submit their incidents to the first MISP instance with the DNS abuse stuff tagged. If our definitions aren't clear enough and you have questions about which thing gets tagged which way, let us know. We'll try to make that clearer. Thanks to Peter for doing a lot of the actual work, I feel like. I'm mostly just herding the cats. But you can contact us with questions. We are on the first Slack instance also, if you want to join the SIG there. Pretty active there. And that's another link to the paper. That's all.
Okay, the next SIG update is EPSS.
All right, I appreciate the stand is on this side from the stairs, but so we only have one slide here, and one of the differences about EPSS from some of the other SIGs is that at the core of what we're doing is a model. And so rather than have a bunch of people with like minds get into a room to talk about which direction do we go, we started with a model. And so the data itself is sort of directing where the SIG is going. And so we've got a very core group of people working with the data and trying to understand that and communicate it. And then the larger SIG is helping us put it into context, communicate, figure out how we're going to disseminate and what makes it useful. And one of the earlier things that we changed was the first model looked at a 12-month window. And a lot of the feedback said that vulnerability remediation was a much shorter 1-month window. So we went to a 30-day time frame in the model. Right now, the SIG is at 235 members. We do meet bi-weekly on Fridays. And one of the things we've learned actually at this conference is that the timing of that particular meeting is not conducive to outside of North America. And so we're looking at exploring ways to offer different meeting times throughout the quarter to hopefully get more diverse participation. And one of the big things for EPSS this year is that we released what we call version 3 of the approach to the model, which created a huge, vast improvement in this, in our predictability. And so the effort by the data team has been insane, great, huge amount of effort. We did release a research paper, and that's being published in a couple of different places. This URL, I can't remember what, I think that's to our website. So if you wanted to grab that QR code. But the research paper goes into a huge amount of depth into what we're doing in the modeling and how we're getting the data and treating it. And we're also able to engage in data sharing agreements through FIRST. And so there's commercial partners that we have that enter in data sharing agreements and contribute data to this effort. And so it's really great that we have that. And they're listed on the bottom there, Cisco, EP5, Gray Noise. They added within the last few months. And actually, Cisco is probably going to close up hopefully this week. And they're going to be officially a data sharing partner. And with version 3, we're a little bit behind in updating the website, so we're going to have some updates on the website. And we want the research paper to have all of the huge in-depth content, and then the website is going to be hopefully a little bit more simpler and more straightforward to understand to communicate what EPSS is doing. So, thank you.
The next SIG update is from MSR.
Good morning, everyone. So the MSR SIG is the multi-stakeholder ransomware SIG. Ransomware means a lot of different things to different people. I didn't have any slides for this because they were encrypted by my daughter. How it is. I do a lot of data visualization, but more seriously, I do want to talk to you about what the SIG's doing and how you can help and what we produce so that you can get your heads around it. We seriously believe ransomware is different to different people and different stakeholders. So for example, some of you might think of ransomware as a form of malware. That's fine. There's certainly a lot of malware that embodies this. Others of you might think of it as a kind of financial format for the crime. A lot of ransomware we're seeing these days doesn't even involve encryption anymore. There's just data leakage and extortion. So we can talk about it in many dimensions. You can chase the money, chase the bitcoins, usually bitcoins, not always. We also look at Monero and a few other things. So there's a significant part of our group who's interested in kind of following the financial transactions of ransomware and doing some statistics about that. So I work with the statistics working group in ransomware doing stats, trends. Is it up or down? Are they targeting different sectors? How are different threat actors behaving and so on? But there are other parts of our group who are more focused on law enforcement, for example, and how we can collaborate with them, how we can share data with them. We're also discussing forensics improvements. So there's a few people who are interested in how we might do forensics differently or recovery differently to kind of make the cost of ransomware less. I know you don't usually hear the words ransomware and hope in the same sentence, but we do have a lot of hope in the ransomware group, which is pretty cool. So for example, we think that only about 16% of people are paying. That's a lot less people paying ransoms than the news and the media would have you believe. Unfortunately, sometimes those ransoms are larger, so the same amount of money is still flowing into some of these groups. But we touch on many of the other SIGs here because we end up talking to the DNS abuse SIG, for example, if we have C2 domains that are being used by ransomware. Or I might speak to the ICS SIG because they're interested in ransomware when it hits an industrial control system. So we do a lot of that kind of collaboration. And one of the things we try and do a lot of is listening. Listening to different stakeholders come in and say, I work with ransomware and this is my problem space and these are the things I want to do. So a couple of things we've learned that I want to share. The P-certs are very, very important. We think you're doing a lot of cool work in the P-cert community, the product cert community, to make tools available to people who are dealing with ransomware in your products. So that's actually a kind of interesting space for us to work with and say, what are you doing to enable tools for your constituents to deal with ransomware cases? The other things that we're doing are collaborating with law enforcement globally for obvious reasons, but listening to how that should be done and how that should be structured. Email addresses, example, can be used in negotiations. So we're talking to ransom negotiators as well and thinking about best common practice for them and the ethics around that. We also talk to the cyber insurers for obvious reasons. So there's kind of a lot going on. We'll publish a training document soon that's designed for certs and covers all of the topics that I've just discussed. It's like, I think it's 120 slides that's been put together by Nadia, one of the members of the group. So 120 slides on ransomware. Yes, I know, we all want to read it. But we'll do that training through the FIRST website as well. So you'll hear more about FIRST's virtual online educational tools in the near future. And then, as I said, the statistics working group. And if you have ideas of other things we should be doing, I'd love to hear them. The very last thing that we're working on producing, if anyone wants to help us with, is kind of ransomware threat actor TTP flashcards. In the sense that if you're a CERT, you don't care about a particular threat actor until you're working on that incident that involves that threat actor, and then you suddenly need the TTPs that are up to date. So we're trying to build some sort of structure around that we can keep up to date as the ransomware SIG, and then you can always come to us and say what TTPs is this particular threat actor using at this particular time. So that's us in a nutshell. Please come and join us. We do have webinars where people come and present their version of ransomware, and it's really amazing to see how it touches so many different parts of this community. So thanks, come join us. You can find us on the website.
Thank you. And just before the last SIG update, I'd like to remind everyone to fill out the session survey. This is a new way of running the SIG updates for anyone that's been at a FIRST conference before, so they would really appreciate any feedback. So being able to run these SIG updates in parallel has meant that 4 extra sessions have been able to be run, but you may miss out on others, so there's probably pros and cons they'd love to hear about. So for the last SIG update, it's cyber insurance.
So, hey everyone. Cyber insurance sounds a bit exotic here in this environment. That's also why we created it, the SIG, together with Aaron 4 years ago, roughly, to go through the main issues that we see or that we saw at that point. So what we did so far, we created antitrust statement, which is really important for the insurers to be able to work within such a kind of an exchange and SIG community. We tried to handle a lot the discussion around the language gap. If a cyber insurer, in most cases driven by legal colleagues, is talking about technical terms, they often mean something different than what the technical guys and the incident response colleagues would mean. That's what we did a lot the last 2 years, and then also starting about the possible conflict of interest when it comes to a cyber claim and the incident response company is paid by the insurer, that this sometimes can lead to, let's say, a different goal, rather doing a fast incident response, closing the case fast, low costs on the insurer side versus what the company in a lot of cases wants to see, a solid incident response, really understanding the root cause and trying to avoid similar things in the future. So these are a lot of discussions going on there. Also, metrics is something we are always interested in, the exchange between the insurers, also the incident response teams. I know that this is quite hard for the insurers because there's let's say, a different understanding of what sharing looks like, but it's still something we want to go forward. Just some highlights. So the SIG meetings are not really regular happening. They are often more ad hoc driven by special topics, by questions that arise on the mailing list. So we had one by 2 colleagues from Aon, one of the largest brokers out there, so more or less the man in the middle between the company that wants to get an insurance and the insurer, explaining how the normal work of a broker looks like, what are the challenges, how they try to fulfill the needs of the company that wants to get insurance, and how to do the, let's say, the translation to the insurer on the other side. Then we had a quite interesting talk. There's also a paper out on that, to show the, let's say, the different approach in doing risk assessment. A lot of the companies do risk assessment based on their business impact, and then classify their internal IT assets based on that. Looking from an attacker perspective, you will maybe look out for different assets as one of your main targets. Let's say getting domain admin, going for the domain controller, going for, let's say, the exchange infrastructure, which in a lot of cases is from a business perspective not really up on the highest list. So that was also quite interesting. And then last but not least, in December last year, Josephine Wolf was presenting her new book, which is talking about the development in the insurance now looking at cyber topics. She was heavily discussing the cyber claims and the legal disputes regarding NotPetya, so the Mondelez and MERS issue, and also trying to explain from an insurance perspective how the history showed how the insurer normally try to evolve or to develop new insurance policies, and how this will change also the future from an insurance perspective. And I think on the last topic, there will be a session later today where you will also get some more insights into the whole discussion around cyber exclusions, war exclusions, and what insurers come up with when it comes to these kind of attacks. And that's it from the cyber insurance side. Thanks.